Hey everyone, Cody Menz here, doing a quick little first look slash pre-review of the Tier 9 reward British medium tank, the Cobra, that will soon be available for players to pick up in the next chapter of the Battle Pass. Currently, even though it's already announced as being in the Battle Pass, there's not enough tokens to get it unless you kind of saved up your tokens for this first chapter. Going into the second, you're going to have enough tokens kind of straddling two Battle Pass chapters to be able to pick it up here. They just did some final balancing on this in the 1.17 common test server here. Hence why I'm making this video, since very low chance of them changing stats after this. However, they might tweak a little bit further before it actually is playable, but these stats should be pretty close to what we see on a live server, if not identical. The most recent changes, they buffed the HESH round damage, increased the reload time as far as buffing the DPM on this, and increasing the accuracy of the Cobra and reducing the on the move penalty a little bit when it comes, or not on the move, but turning your turret. They made it so the aim time doesn't, or aiming circle doesn't bloom as much. This tank though is going to be pretty unique. So it's got a 4-round auto loading gun that reloads in 1.5 seconds between each round, so the rounds come out really freaking fast. And your ammunition type is heat, HESH, and HE. No AP, no APCR. So getting into things here, jumping into a quick comparison. So I've got the 3 different round types here on the Cobra, and then some comparable tanks here. There's no true comparison given that this is kind of unique with the different ammunition, but these are the closest ones between mediums and heavies, since this tank is kind of like a fat medium tank, somewhere sitting between a medium and a heavy tank. So getting into things here, your standard heat rounds, so 360 damage. Your premium HESH rounds, 490 damage. This used to be 465, down to 490. And then your standard HE rounds at 515. So your standard heat rounds are kind of close to a standard B when it comes to damage and also penetration. Although the standard B, it's firing standard rounds, you're shooting heat. So do bear that in mind. Your premium HESH and your HE don't have any super good comparisons here, just because these all don't really have great like HE rounds. Like the standard B here is probably the closest when it comes to this, with 440 damage and 105 millimeters of penetration. It's probably the closest comparison you got, and this does 490 and 515. So this is kind of going to be your main round, your premium HESH rounds, from how they have it balanced. However, all 3 rounds kind of have their own pros and cons. This tank, so one thing to keep in mind is your standard rounds do put you at 1440 for your burst. That does kind of put you kind of in line with a lot of other tanks here, but your HESH rounds jump up to 1960 for your burst, and your standard HE does 2060 damage for your burst. So it's kind of an odd tank with how they have to balance it, because you have kind of 2 different round types, you know, with your heat and then your HE rounds. So looking at your gun stats otherwise, so really good gun depression at 10 degrees, not great gun elevation. Your aiming time is actually pretty bad here, 3.64, so a long aiming time. So that's kind of a sad thing to see, given that you're shooting 1.5 seconds potentially between each round in the magazine. Your accuracy isn't too bad, like 0.36, so that's the same as the Emil 2, better than the T54E1, and not super far off of the other ones, but you are not the most accurate thing in the world. As far as like sniping and stuff like that. And your standard heat and your standard HE rounds don't have the best shell velocity. They're sitting just at 800 meters a second, just about. However, your premium HESH does 1165 for the shell velocity, so it's much better on a premium HESH. Go figure. DPM, so this is where you have kind of 2 different DPMs here. Your standard heat, so 1648 for your base value, worst out of everything here. It's lower than a chart feature 4, and that's at 1830. To put things into perspective, the Emil 2 has 951 more DPM. It's a lot. Jumping over to the premium HESH round, that's kind of going to be your de facto round. So that bumps it up to 2243. So your DPM is much better than your mediums here in the comparison. However, at the same time, you're still not as good as say an Emil 2, a little bit lower than the T54E1 and a little bit higher than the 5120. So this thing is a little bit lacking in the DPM department when you're looking at the heat and the HESH and kind of getting an average between them, because you're not going to fire 100% HESH, or some people might, but you're going to want to take both grounds here. Now, getting down into things though, that HESH, you're doing almost 2,000 damage across those 4 shots. That's a lot of freaking damage, to where if you're able to pull off those shots, you're going to kill quite a few things in front of you, to where the DPM might not come into play. However, the 48-second reload is very, very long, so that really stings. Getting down, we'll get into the armor model and stuff here shortly too. Armor between kind of a Char Future and the heavy tanks here, like the T54E1, AMX 5120. Not great, not paper thin. Hit points, just your typical amount of hit points. When it comes, it's actually a little bit low, excuse me. It's actually a little low for a tier 9 medium tank hit point wise at 1600. So do keep that in mind. Mobility here, so this is where it's kind of interesting. So it's got a really fast reverse speed at 25 kilometers an hour. 40 kilometer an hour forward isn't great for the medium tank comparisons. Also, some heavy tanks are faster than it too, because once you put the specific power into play too, you're a bit better than the heavies, worse off than the mediums. So you're really good at getting back off of like a ridge line. Because you go really fast, your power to weight isn't terrible, but you are kind of capped with the 40 kilometers an hour going forward. Camouflage, not too great, better than the heavies, worse than the medium tanks. And your V range at 370 actually is not very good whatsoever. Like, it's worse than heavies, worse than mediums for the most part. Now, getting into some like soft stats and the armor model for this over on tanks.gg, same tanks I have pulled up here. But getting into things with the on the move accuracy, so 0.21 and then 0.08. This is the turret traverse. They had buffed this most recently. It's not too bad with turning your turret, which is a good thing, especially compared to these other ones. But your on the move accuracy, comparable to the Char Future 4. So it's not perfect. It's not game breaking either. It used to be a lot worse than these values, to where this is, somewhat workable, especially if you throw like a V stabilizer on it. Your mobility, as far as your terrain resistances, aren't that bad. So comparing it to the medium tanks, they're not great, like they're not standing out, but they're also not too far off of it, and they're much better than the heavy tank ones. So when it comes to the terrain resistance, the Cobra isn't beat up there. Your mainly gets capped by that top forward speed of 40 kilometers an hour, which is really going to hit you. Now, armor-wise, this is where the tank, and this is against its own round, so going off of the 268 penetration for the heat round. Now, just level ground, not that great. Do keep in mind, though, the lower glacis is going to trick the hell out of people, where the lower glacis is going to get you a lot of bounces, because people usually shoot there thinking that the upper glacis is weaker. However, in this case, it's not for this tank. Doesn't mean, the upper glacis is fairly strong against lower tiers, not too great against like tier 9s, tier 10 shooting you premium rounds. You do have a little bit of a shot trap, given that the turret shape's kind of funky. So when it comes to people shooting down here, you're going to get some bounces, unless, it bounces into the thin part underneath. And then the upper part of your turret isn't super strong. You're going to get penned, however, using your gun depression. It does get pretty strong here, except for against like premium heat rounds, tank destroyers. So it's kind of all over the place when it comes to the frontal armor. It doesn't really have armor elsewhere, but when you're facing off against, so like tier 7, tier 8 tanks, low pen tier 9s, or like poorly placed shots, this thing's armor is just enough that it's going to work, so that's where it kind of fits in between, you know, a medium and a heavy when it comes to its armor. It's not quite good enough to protect you consistently, but against certain tanks, it's going to feel pretty strong. In any event, though, you know, hopefully you enjoyed watching this video, where this tank's going to be pretty exciting when it comes out, as far as being fully released and being able to actually play it. And hopefully this video helped you, learn a little bit more about it in case you're wanting to pick it up or fight against it for when this thing is barreling down at you with its premium HESH with the 4 rounds. In any event, thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.